And the comments are often like, Garry, you're so zen. Like, I love your super calming voice. Like, you must meditate a lot. And I'm like, you don't even know.
Yeah.
It's like, are you kidding? Oh my God. Like, deep down, it's like, it's a mess, right? It's like, I am like the most self-critical person.
What's up, everyone? This is Justin Kahn. Welcome to my podcast, The Quest, where I dive into the ups and downs of trailblazers around me to help you figure out life and where you want to be. Before we start, bang that subscribe button for unfiltered conversations on tech, wellness, and entertainment dropping every Tuesday. Today, I'm sitting down with Garry Tan. Garry is a veteran entrepreneur, investor, and content creator. We were both partners together at Y-Combinator, and he went on to start his own venture fund, Initialized Capital. Garry runs a YouTube channel that's been my inspiration to start creating my own content, including The Quest. In our conversation, Garry and I both open up about our families and struggles. This was one of my favorite conversations, and I hope you learned something from it. So we're starting. Thank you, Garry. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, brother.
We've known each other for a very long time. It's been, I want to say like since 2008, right? 2007 or 2008? So.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, everyone knew you guys from, you know, I think Justin TV had just started. What was the timeline? I mean, I started my startup in 2008, like January through March or so.
Yeah.
And then we got into YC then. And of course, once you even find out about YC, you want to get to know all the founders who did it. And so
yeah,
you just go down the list and you sign up for absolutely everyone's thing when you could still do that.
Yeah.
And you could still kind of do that, but maybe just for, you know, the SaaS and consumer stuff. I don't know. There's like a lot. There's a lot of enterprise stuff now.
It'd be like a full-time job to try every YC product. I mean, I'm sure you're trying to do that right now, right? Like every investor, myself included, is out there looking through the YC list and trying to figure out what works and what's good.
Yeah, you got to, because that's the only place in the world where you know there will be $1 billion startup guaranteed. Like, there are many other rooms where it might happen, but like that room, you know, there will be one.
Yeah,
maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah, PG really created the perfect FOMO machine for investors. But
yeah,
back in 2008, it wasn't quite like that, right?
Yeah, it was very different, honestly.
Yeah,
I mean, YC, people forget, like they think Y Combinator today is, you know, Harvard, but you know, you and I mean, you in particular remember when it was actually a startup and it was, you know, not anything close to what it is today, or even 10 years ago, weirdly.
Yeah, back in 2005, it was like just Paul's friends who would come to the demo day. He called it Angel Day at the time, but there's 15 of Paul's friends, you know, half of whom had worked for him at ViaWeb, his startup, and so made money from him, and I think felt kind of obligated to show up, and it was not quite the same.
Like a true founder.
Yeah,
you rope in everyone you know, and like, you know, sometimes they look at it and they're like, why am I here? But they'll do it anyway because, you know, they either love you or they owe you.
Exactly. You're trying to get, that's your initial customers, the people who love you and who owe you, and or you can browbeat into using your software.
Yeah, but that's what it takes, you know, like that's just the first step of the quest.
Yeah. Okay, so tell me let's go back to your like first step though. I mean, I want to go all the way back to you growing up. You're from the Bay Area. Tell me what it was like to be young Garry Tan.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I was debating. Well, I mean, part of the thing coming on here, I am so inspired by just your quest and how you've been able to sort of show that you can talk about mental health and, you know, have clarity around it, and then that will actually make you a lot more successful. So, okay. I mean, basically, my dad was kind of a raging alcoholic his entire life.
Yeah.
You know, his entire adult life.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm gonna go kind of deeper because, you know, he grew up in Singapore. You know, that side of the family, I think they were basically, it was kind of like In the Mood for Love, you know, the movie.
I haven't seen it.
Where it's like the Chinese diaspora.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's, you know, business people, it's sort of like the merchant class of China had to flee China, and something like the largest ethnic group that's, you know, not the sort of ethnicity of that area in Asia, you know, whether it's Burma or Singapore or pretty much
It's
everywhere
Chinese.
in Southeast Asia is Chinese. Yeah. So in a way, we're a little bit like the Jews of Asia.
Yeah.
Actually, it's like you just get spread out everywhere. And so my grandfather on that side moved to Singapore, and then
Like during the Cultural Revolution.
yeah, and my grandmother, was actually illiterate actually, and she actually only speaks like sort of a very like not even one of the common dialects of Chinese. So, and it was sort of like in the mood for love, but then kind of with like an opium twist actually. So I found out that my I guess my great grandma was really addicted to opium, and obviously addiction has really plagued people. I mean, addiction is the worst, and it's like it just causes so much pain. And the reason why I go back that far is like just kind of being shocked at how far back like my pain in my life went back to like the pain like inflicted from many generations back in my family history. And so that addiction caused my grandmother to extort more and more money from my grandfather, and he left the family. And then he actually left, and like I don't know who my grandfather on that side is. And so I've been like using 23andMe and getting my dad to use 23andMe, because that remains like one of the core things that I think, how you watch Westworld and there's like, your beginning story, like the thing that, sort of defines you. I think now I realize, having a lot more empathy for my father, that was like the defining thing, like not knowing who his father was. And it's like, I mean, it's funny because it like, this is my father. It's like, it's not a movie, this isn't like a piece of fiction that I watch on HBO. It's like my father's defining thing is that he never knew his father. And then my grandmother remarried into another wealthy family in Singapore, but my father was the stepson. And so, and being the stepson of, I mean, he grew up like, being in limos, and, I think they were all, all bankers in Singapore. There's a lot of money over there. And, he went to the best private schools, but he was always in, I don't know, how Chinese families are sometimes, like, what I hear about that is like his upbringing was always that of being sort of the second class citizen within his own family. Right. And he could have, the thing is like, it's not like they treated him poorly. It's just that he always felt that like second class. Right. And the thing is, if he stayed in Singapore, he would have lived, basically in luxury, like it's like it's amazing how much of the world is basically multi-generational wealth, especially outside of the United States. And so that's why my dad left. So he, tested in, he's really smart, like brilliant with electronics. He tested in to get to, he basically paved his own way, and he left Singapore because it was too small a fishbowl. And it's like all of his like extended half brothers and sisters and family, it was like too much expectation. And that was the chip on his shoulder. And then that came with the dark side, which is, that upbringing, like for whatever reason, like he became really addicted to alcohol, basically all through, like, I think probably once he went to college, he basically would drink like a 6-pack of beer every single night, or like, I mean, maybe it's sometimes, if it was bad, if something bad was happening in his life, he'd drink like 2 6-packs of beer.
Yeah.
Like to this day, I can't drink Budweiser.
Yeah.
Like I hate that beer.
That was his beer.
It's the king of beers. Like I fucking hate that beer, honestly.
Yeah.
And so, and then the difficulty about all that stuff is like, I also think that he was like deeply damaged by his upbringing and his childhood, such that like he couldn't keep a job.
Yeah.
And so, the hard part is we moved like 8 or 9 times. It's funny because it probably gave me a lot of skills, which was just being able to make friends very easily.
Yeah.
It's like, I like going into new places because,
It's like
It's
an
like
adaptive
it's a
trait.
different game, right? It's yeah. I mean, and that's the weird thing. Like, and I'm sure a lot of your guests and you have found this too. You know, these things that sort of almost break you also make you.
Yeah, there's so many parallels to my own story where, I feel like my mom was similar in Chinese diaspora. They fled the Cultural Revolution, grew up in Malaysia for 10 years, and had this deep scarcity mindset from like not having a lot, growing up very poor in a rural area. And when she immigrated to the United States, she like brought that along. And then the way she raised us, was with this scarcity mindset, and
Yeah.
like the feeling of not having enough, which I don't. I have a lot of empathy for her. It wasn't her fault, and I don't have no blame. It's very healed now, but it was that. I grew up. It created all these patterns as an adult where I'm like, I'm making money, but it's never enough, or like I need more.
Yeah. No.
you
Yeah.
know and
Exactly.
so the
That's exactly what
generational
happens.
trauma, like you carry the thing your parents raised, maybe their parents raised them a certain way, they got trained a certain way, and then they pass that along because of their experiences. And so I understand that, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, and it's intense because, now what I realize is because like, I remember growing up and he was always really, just really proud of his education, which was great because it meant that, he was going to invest in my education and he pushed me really, really hard. But there's a shadow side to that. And, I only actually even realized this. It sort of broke me open, like even last week in therapy. Um, I mean, for those of you who have ever done therapy, like the reason why you do it is like once in a while you get this breakthrough, and like, I mean, I don't know why. It's usually like you realize something. It's like an epiphany, and you actually break down and like cry, and like it's like it breaks your heart open somehow. I don't know. Like I just had this happen about this particular thing, which is because I am so grateful and thankful for everything that I have in my life now. And I never thought I would have any of that because, like, we didn't have money for food sometimes growing up, and that's because my dad couldn't keep his job. And in those moments when he didn't keep his job, like, he would drink himself basically every single day. And my mom got paid like her $14 an hour job as a nurse assistant. And she didn't speak English and she has a hearing impediment. So, we would survive in like a 1-bedroom apartment, and then most of the money would basically go to rent and beer. And I remember like eating basically like bread and milk, and that was like the best I could do, right? Or I remember like, and this is like why I understand, that we are so lucky in tech. We are so lucky. It's ridiculous, right? It's outrageous, right? We don't have to worry about this stuff. But like, if you're working class and you don't have skills, like I was that kid, and like we ate well when my mom would, every so often at her nursing home, someone would drop off a bag of, expired bread. And it's like Thomas's English muffins are like my favorite thing in the world. Like today I still buy them, and then I like go on Instacart and I'm like, yeah, Thomas's, that's what we're eating. And it's like, that was like a good haul. I remember there was an entire time in junior high when it was like, I became like the Thomas's English muffins, like, like recipe champion. Like I could make sandwiches. I could make pizza. I could like tear them up and make like little pizza bites. Like I would do that for me and my brother, So, and it was like the super little thing, right? And I think that's why I love food so much now, because we didn't have it. It's like crazy, and it's not like my parents didn't love me, but we had like problems growing up,
What's
and
what's your relationship with your parents like now?
I mean, I send them money I try to support them as much as I can, and honestly, like, thank God, like my dad stopped, he stopped drinking. He like fell off the wagon a couple times, but sort of in the past 5 years in particular, I think he started going to therapy himself. He went to AA. I brought him to AA. AA is amazing, by the way. It's like, what's funny is like after going to AA, I realized YC and AA have a lot in common. Like we have our mantras, we have a group therapy session, we don't feel alone, and then we have we even have sponsors,
Yeah, there's a sense of community of going through an experience that most people think is isolating, but then when you realize like it's a shared experience, there's like that strength in the community.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I feel super blessed now, and I guess the only other strange thing that I don't know if you ever feel, earlier you're saying just this extreme expectation. It's like anyone who's Asian who has like high expectation parents. I mean, I don't know. I haven't met that many people who have like sort of are part of the Chinese diaspora in particular who like don't get that from our parents. And I didn't realize that was like a diaspora thing. Like, the immigrants, the people who left, they were actually sort of like the people who had some wealth and it was going to be taken from them and their lives. I mean, it was taken, and if they didn't leave, they had to leave with like often the clothes on their back, right? Or they had gold like sewed into their pockets when they like, had to like sneak out of the country to avoid being killed, right? And I didn't realize this, but that was like one of the defining characteristics. It's like that's where that comes from. It's like our families were always the strivers, period. Right?
We're strivers, we're successful, and then had to run and like really value that education and kind of like working hard to rebuild it. And that was my grandparents and their family. My grandparents had 10 children. My mom was one of the younger ones, and they fled China like secretly. He had a business there, and they fled. And my two oldest uncles were like not allowed to leave. They were like held in custody. They weren't like held in custody, but they like had their passports, I think, taken or something, so they couldn't leave as means of like getting the making sure the family like came back. And eventually they like fled over the border to Hong Kong and like with their clothes on their back, literally. And then that's how the family escaped China.
Survivors.
Yeah, it's super fucked up. And I mean, like going back to what you were saying about being blessed, it's like, you and I never have to deal with anything like that, right? Like we're like even just basic security, right?
Kids,
like,
hopefully,
yeah, it's such a blessing. So how did, this family situation and kind of growing up in this environment, how did that affect you as, a young adult in high school and then in college? Like how did this manifest into getting into startups or programming or all of that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I've been reflecting on this really lately and like starting to sort of wonder if we have free will, actually.
Or for all like Dolores from Westworld.
Basically, I mean, it's funny, the fiction hits exactly at the right time in some ways. Like it's that show is so prescient, and my technological optimism and utopianism basically comes from Star Trek: The Next Generation. If my parents could afford cable, it would have been something else. But instead, it was like turn on Channel 44. Growing up in Fremont in the SF Bay Area, and it's on syndication. Hits exactly at the right time. I watched like Star Trek every single day for like basically my whole childhood, and then I started rewatching it a few years ago, and I'm like, oh, that's why I think that what a good leader looks like is actually Captain Picard. Right? That's like my platonic ideal of like what a good leader looks like. And I like fail and fail and fail and like desperately want to be Captain Picard. Right. And, but going back to like, I guess the Chinese parental expectation part. And I think a lot of this is, I blame the addiction. I blame my great grandma's addiction to opium, putting my father on this like sort of broken home path. And then also, sort of basically causing addiction in my father's life. All of the standards that I hold myself to, I realize my father deep down has. Like, he knows what success looks like. And then the difficulty is the addiction robbed that of him. Like, he is super, super smart. He was, making his own electronic clocks in like the 70s just for fun. He was a hacker's hacker. Like, we get to play with software. He was playing with hardware in like, he was like a maker before, 30 years before a maker movement was a thing, right? Like if he was in the right place at the right time, if he was in the Bay Area during Homebrew Computer Club, he would have been one of those guys, right? And then I realized the addiction, he understood all the things that we understand about the world. And this was like, before I was even born, before either of us were born, right? He knew that electronics and computers were going to change the world and he wanted to be a part of it. But then the addiction robbed him of that. And then what happens that after that, I realized he basically projected all the things he wanted to do on me. But then there was also that layer of like Chinese paternalism plus alcoholism. And so, the epiphany I had recently was that he would always tell me that I was set apart. I would come home with a B+ on something and he'd be like, not good enough. And I'm like, it's good enough for this person. And he'd be like, it's not good enough for you. You are set apart. He was careful enough not to say you're better than other people, which I was like thankful for. But because that, I think it's funny because like, you run across a lot of like kids who are, the kids of wealthy people now. And you can kind of see like, oh, if you go a little bit too far, like it really alters their personality in a way that like you don't want, it's like unintended consequence. It's like you're better than other people is like, oh, that's probably too far. Like it can feel that way, but the outcomes, we're not going to be happy with the outcomes if that's what people feel, So, and then the hard part is like that was accompanied with like, if I came home with like actually a B on a test, like you're set apart, a B on the report card, I got a punch in the face.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And, I grew up like thinking that was normal.
Yeah.
And it's not normal, like that's, it took a therapist to tell me like, Garry, like you went through something that is not supposed to happen to children.
Yeah.
And so I'm even now still like sort of processing that. And now what I realize is like the result is that I have a very extreme superego.
Yeah. That kind of keeps you on the rails.
It's like I'm on the edge, I'm always on the edge. If I can't come off the edge, even if I like, spend a week meditating, I probably still would like the second I like came out of it, I'd be on the edge again, And it's not something I talk about, and it's not. I think it's not clear to people, because the funniest thing, especially after doing a lot of YouTube, and a lot of people spend. The coolest thing about YouTube is that tens of thousands of people you basically spend 15 minutes with me every single week about whatever I want to talk to them about, and that's really cool. And the comments are often like, Garry, you're so zen. Like, I love your super calming voice. Like, you must meditate a lot. And I'm like, you don't even know.
Yeah.
It's like, are you kidding? Oh my God. Like deep down, it's like, it's a mess, right? It's like, I am like the most self-critical person. And the thing that I haven't been able to reconcile, and I'm curious like how you think about it, is like, how do you, as a creator, like I have that cycle within me. Like if my video only does like a third as well as like I usually do, like the immediate it's like self-hate even, like I punch myself in the face now, like emotionally. It's like I feel bad. And then, I always think about Steve Jobs and how when Mobile Me came out, he dragged like the whole team into the auditoriums. Like, I don't know, I hear 50 people, 100 people who worked on that product. And he was like, you have embarrassed us. You've embarrassed Apple. You've embarrassed us in front of our friends, Walt Mossberg. And then he dragged out the leader of that group and he fired them on the spot. Like, get the fuck out of here, And so I haven't been able to like break that apart, because it's like, that's the hard edge that's, I can't tell if it's necessary.
Yeah. It's like, that really resonates with me, because I had that experience my whole life, which is, first there's these formative experiences when you're young from your parents or peers, that really made me, where they were saying care about these things, right? Like care about things being, get good grades or being successful, and then eventually you internalize that, and then for me, I was repeating that to myself all through my career, right? For decades, like, oh, I'm not good enough. I was very comparative to other people. Like, this other person's doing better than me. I need to do better. And I would like, that was a source of like my own self torture, you know? And I want to highlight one thing you said was like, you know, you don't see that beneath the surface, right? Like everybody thinks everybody else is like obliviously like succeeding, right? Like they're like, they're just like, you know, I looked at like the guys from, I don't know, Dropbox or Airbnb or friends of mine who are like really successful. And I was like, oh, those guys are just like, they're super happy. They're succeeding. Nothing's wrong. You know, if I could just be there, then I'd be, you know, everything would be fixed for me, you know. And it's, you could do it on YouTube. You could say, oh, I have 60,000 subs, but there's someone with 500,000. And if I just like, you know, got to 500,000, then I'd be like set, you know. And that wheel never stops turning. But it's so interesting to me that you said that, you know, beneath the surface, people think you're one way, but beneath the surface, like it's completely different, and you don't see that. And that's how I felt my whole life. And I'm sure, you know, I know actually, I'm not just sure, I'm 100% positive there are people out there who watch your videos and they're like, if I could just be where Gary's at, my life would be fucking set. Like, that is the calmest guy. He's like the most confident person. He's the person who is like, that's the person I want to be in the world. And they don't, you know,
that's my mask, man.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the mask.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. That's so vulnerable. You know,
dude,
I totally get it.
I think deep down what I realize is like, we're not different. Like, we're the same. So, you know, and like that goes for everyone watching this, like, you know, watching now live, but also now listening or watching after the fact. It's like, know that we're not different. I mean, I deeply know and believe that now. Like, everyone's the hero of their own story. And there is no, you know, we were created, I deeply believe we were all human beings, like, created equally. And you know, once you think about that, and that everyone is fighting some sort of battle or war that you don't know about, you know, that will change the way you go about, you know, the world and your business. And, you know, when someone cuts you off, you know, there's something going on, right? There's something in that person's life. And so, and then it's a choice, right? Like, we can play it, you know, we can play it the way, you know, a child would play it. You know, now that we're both parents, I realize there's sort of the innate, and then there's the divine. And we can choose the instinct, or we can choose, you know, the elevated, and it's a choice at all times. And the more we revere ourselves, and the more we are the best version of ourselves, then the more we can reflect goodness and have an impact that, I mean, frankly, that, you know, that's all I want. You know, we're all going to be forgotten. All of this stuff, like all the money in the world, everything's going to go away. And all that matters is, like, I mean, I think of ourselves, you know, what's happening right now is this great emergence of an internet consciousness that is actually human consciousness. And we get to be a brain cell or a blood cell or, you know, a nerve cell. And that's the gift.
I really respect and appreciate that sentiment, in that, you know, now what I hear is like, he's saying like, we have this opportunity to kind of stop the generational trauma, right? Like, and stop repeating cycles that maybe were unconscious, and now pass along the gift that you have to pass along to your kids, which is really the only important thing in the world, is to help, you know, is to give them the best possible upbringing and opportunity. But also, like, you know, for myself, I spent all this, I was thinking, what do I want for my kid? You know, I don't want my kid to be rich or famous. I mean, if they want that, that's okay. But what I want is like for him to be the source of his own approval in the world, you know, for him to be a kind person and compassionate, for him to be empathetic and to have self-love and love for other people. And that's all I care about. Like, I don't care about him, like, you know, him being a doctor or an entrepreneur or following my footsteps or anything like that. And, you know, it took so much self-work to get there, you know, like the Justin of 10 years ago would be like, oh, I want my kid to be like Bill Gates or whatever, you know, but that's like, I think that self-work to produce.
How did you do that?
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm not there.
Yeah.
Like, you know, Stephanie my wife is absolutely there, and she's like, Garry, you can't have these expectations.
Yeah.
And then for me, it's like, I want them to figure out, like, what I want for them is like the ability to experience, Csikszentmihalyi's flow. Csikszentmihalyi came up with this idea, or like actually, it's for those of you in the audience watching, it's like Soul, the movie Soul, that moment when the main character can play the piano and he floats off to like someplace else. And I felt that like mainly when I was like coding and designing, right? But I feel it now when I'm like editing a video or even on Clubhouse. I don't know. It's like there's something really powerful about, like the other day we had Jason Ma, who was on your show, on the Tech After Party on Clubhouse, and he was talking about exorcisms. And I'm like, this is insane and awesome. Like this is a part of the world. Like we have the Tech After Party, but then we were talking about like spirituality and like there are things we don't understand. And I'm like, this is sort of the thing I want all the time. Like I want more people who are broken open, who are sort of, they can receive things like that. It's like, yeah, it's tech, but like if we understand society so much better, that helps them, right? And so I don't know. I mean, now I'm digressing, but I'm like, there's so many ways to experience flow, and all of those are like sort of flow states for me, and I want that for my kids, right? Like and then the hard part about it is like, I can't separate the flow state from excellence. And then it's like, as long as I am not prescriptive about like how it happens, that is still what I want for them. And then I don't know how to reconcile that because of the excellence part. And then, I mean, I'm like, I need like 10 more years of therapy, I think.
But the first thing is like you're aware of it. And so that's like the first step in anything, right? Is that you're aware of wanting excellence for them, or wanting the flow state, which I think the flow state itself is, that's a beautiful kind of unique part of the human experience. And I also, would want that for my son, but like, does it have to be accompanied with like a drive to excellence? I don't know if those things are inexorably linked. And so, for myself, where the way I got to it was just, I remember one thing I'll share is I remember I was so proud when my brother sold Cruise. My brother started Cruise and we sold Cruise. I was like, but I was really like proud for myself in a way too. It was like selfish because I was like, oh yeah, we're like the kind of brothers who have like billion-dollar companies, right? And it's like a very there was like an ego-driven dark part of it. I remember when he sold it. I mean, I was also proud of him as a brother, and he did an amazing thing, but there was this like selfish aspect of it that I don't think I've ever admitted. And
yeah, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I hear that, man.
Yeah.
Like basically we see the reflection of others in ourselves, and then
yeah.
Where does the ego and, where does our identity end and like, our community begin, and what should you feel good about? Yeah, I don't know.
Well, so for me, it was kind of like, it's almost like, I don't know, who's other famous brother, like the Emmanuel brothers or something, like how they're all like, like really successful. It was kind of like feeling like, oh, I'm part of this like family that's successful now. And so that like,
I mean, I have to, my brother, I feel bad because I do feel like I impose like expectations around that on. I have a brother who works for Bodyport, which is YC company, and I still have like aspirations for what you have with your brothers, and what honestly Sam and Jack and Max have, the Altmans. It's like they're in the YC community we have like these powerful brothers, right? And I think that's awesome, and that's so openly I want that for me and my brother, and he's so much younger. And so, yeah, I mean, there's still time.
Yes, for sure. There's still time. But, I brought it up because for me, it was interesting because it was like kind of wanting success for someone in my family in a selfish way. And I think I would have felt that way about my kid had I had a kid then. I want my kid to be successful because that reflects well on me, right? And I think as I did the self-work, therapy, big part of it, ayahuasca I've talked about, like meditation, all of these things to realize that like I will never find satisfaction in the outside world, like lasting satisfaction. It helped me release all of the things that, I thought would give me that satisfaction, whether it was, bigger company or making more money or having more Twitter followers or even having my son be successful, And so that I think it was just doing that self work that really helped me release it, and I think that you're clearly on that journey, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to admit, I mean, hearing you talk about, wanting your brother to be successful, but like sort of as a part of you, like that, that resonates with
Yeah,
me, And then the hard part is like people, sometimes people don't want it, right?
for
So
sure.
it's
Yeah,
like my brother has different, he has different values than me, and my kids are going to have different values than me, and it's not my job to like impose my way of life on really anyone, actually. It's probably, I mean, if anything, like, and that's the hard part. That's the part that I haven't reconciled. It's like my father played an extremely more active role than I wish he did, right? But then also, if he didn't do all of those things, if I didn't walk through, frankly, that abuse, but also, his expectations, and then it's not like he didn't love me. Also, he also was very clear how much he like desperately loved me, which is its own thing. Like it became very hard for me to learn how to love people the right way because I had all of these other things attached to love.
yeah.
So
So those things for you were tools, right? Like he gave you
yeah,
things. Like that's, I think that was a big part of my own journey, was to say, oh, like I had this part of me that like really wants to be liked by other people. Like it's the part of me that wants like more Twitter followers. And it's like, it was very unattractive for me to admit to myself at first, like, you're the kind of guy who just wants to be liked online, like nobody really wants to say that out loud. And then, then the first step was to admit it. And the second step was to say, oh, like, I love that part of myself. Like, I accept that part of myself. Like, I am that guy, and that helped me. Like, that was a tool. Like, the desire to be liked by other people helped me become a successful entrepreneur, and helped me be driven to, like, not give up when I wanted to. And obviously, there's been material rewards from that, and security, and feeling accepted and prestige or whatever. And many of those things ultimately don't matter that much downstream, but it did help me a lot. And I think admitting that to myself, and kind of accepting that part of me was a critical step in the process of saying, okay, now how do I want to be in the world? Do I want to show up a different way? But I don't think I could have just gotten to the end state of saying, oh, now I'm like Zen, and I can like accept the world as it is, and I don't need things to be different, without having gone through that process of seeing how I was in the world and saying, oh, okay, I accept that. Like, that's from my
yeah,
childhood, and that's okay. And I love that part of myself.
yeah. That's a huge step. Honestly, I would be way more successful in my business career if I had figured all this stuff out when I was 22. But
You and
what I realize now is all the things I just told you in this podcast that's gonna like go out to a bunch of people. I hid because the world isn't ready for it. Right? I can tell you all these things because like I'm good.
right.
Like we're
You
made.
know,
Justin, we are fucking made, and I am so thankful for that. Right? But like when you're 22, you got to blend in.
well,
Like
let me challenge that assumption, because I think that you and I both think right now that, like,
or I
had
thought,
we
or when I was there, I thought,
exactly when you were there,
which
you
is
thought,
different, right?
right? Because
Thank you for that correction. Yeah.
when we were there, when we were young, we thought, oh, like, if I reveal this stuff, like, people aren't going to invest in my company. They're not going to want to join my team. They're going to think I'm like weak. I'm going to look different. And I think, for myself, I really believe that had I had these skills when I was younger, I would have been more successful. If I was
Yeah.
willing to be vulnerable. Like, there was that Good Time with Boz last night, right? And he was saying,
Yeah.
if he was, he's an executive at Facebook, right? He was saying that he, like, as he became more vulnerable in the workplace, like, he was actually perceived as stronger, right? And
Yeah.
that's
Right.
my own experience too. Is like, as I've kind of shared more and more online, people are like, oh wow, I want to work with that guy. I want to
Yeah.
invest in that guy. I want to be like that guy, more than whatever was the case before for me.
Yeah. You're not. I mean, it feels like a mask is necessary. Well, I haven't figured that part out yet, right? Like, I'm with you where I wish that I wish I did therapy and inner work, on my own at 18 and 22, because I was spending so much time, because I went to Stanford and I was like the poorest kid in the dorm,
Yeah.
right? And I went to, and then even going to work, it's like you have to have that mask, or it felt like you had to have that mask. And I can't run the experiment again to know like what that would look
Yeah.
like. I'd like to think that we would like get to where we are today or beyond where we are today much faster. But the fear was definitely there. I realized I spent way too long trying to blend in and fit in, and like act like I was normal, like that I wasn't abused as a child, that I didn't have, food insecurity as a part of me, like, that I'm carrying around all the time.
Yeah.
Right? Like I hid all these things. And then now I realize if I had accepted them earlier, I would be a better manager. I would have actually done better things with my life. I would have attracted way smarter people to come work with me. And, my startup, like Posturous, instead of being like, I mean, honestly, a good $20 million exit to Twitter, it could have been like, our enemy at the time was Tumblr, and Tumblr sold for $1 billion. And of course that was like a scam.
Yeah.
I mean that in the most loving way possible, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I respect the crap out of that team, and they are amazing. But, there are things that last and things that don't. And I wanted to last, and we didn't make it,
But I mean, you ultimately did get to go on this sort of path. And one thing I want to touch on, because I mean, you've told the story before, but I think it's important for the audience and the listeners, is like, you had opportunities, you programmed, you had opportunities, and you went to Stanford, you had opportunities to join a startup, right? Peter Thiel was trying to recruit you to join Palantir as employee number 6, 7, something like that. And
number one.
employee number 1, sorry.
I could have been a co-founder, apparently.
Co-founder of Palantir, but at the time you didn't have the like sense of security to like actually make the leap, right? And so how did you get to the point where you were like, okay, I can go pursue a startup and pursue my like passion?
I mean, I always wanted to work on a startup, and growing up, read all the biographies of Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, and, it's like, what if someday, right? And then the funniest thing about it, I was reminded of this recently, but in the moment, even when I met Peter Thiel, like I knew he was a really good founder, and he had sold PayPal, and he, but he wasn't like the legend yet. He wasn't the myth, the man, the legend. And so now it's like extra crazy, but in the moment it's like, this sounds kind of crazy. I know this person is really smart, and then my friends are smart. Why didn't I quit? And it was actually because, our realities are basically constructed based on the media narrative that, we allow ourselves to believe. And so, the media narrative now is like, do whatever Peter Thiel says, right? And I say it myself on like my YouTube channel. It's like, Peter wants you to go work at a place, you probably should do that. But if I think about it, it's like, what is the implication of that? And, I don't know, I always like to think about things. I actually use this frame all the time now as like, what would the global brain think or say? Because I think this is fractal. Like, doing therapy and understanding where I came from makes me now realize, like, I have an inner monologue that is at war all the time. It's actually kind of like Twitter, right? Like every single argument, I can hear both sides, and I can sort of feel what feels right on each of those sides. And I can see how the people who have those opinions, they have those opinions for a reason. And then after that, it's like, how do you skip ahead? How do you make a better decision? And, that's sort of playing out. That's why social media is so interesting right now. It's like, these conversations didn't happen before. They couldn't happen this fast. And so the synapse of the global brain is like just firing a lot faster right now. And in the same way, like when you're trying to make a decision, if you are to be a better leader, you actually have to have those decisions. You have to recognize the different parts and then make that decision much faster and be in a much more integrated way, right? You need to have that conversation, and it's like, and then disagree but commit. Like inside, that's how an org works. That's how a nation has to work, and then that's how you have to work in your own brain.
Have you heard of a type of therapy called internal family systems?
Oh, I've heard a lot. I think our friend Dan, do you know Daniel Gackley? He's like the main mod of Hacker News, which is actually fascinating, right? That's like that whole interplay. Hacker News is like sort of, Yeah, and all of Reddit, honestly, like anything like that is remarkably like what the brain probably has to do around a voting system about different ideas, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, and I don't know. I only bring that up because, like, you know, I know Dan goes to goes to these sessions, and you know, there are these really amazing therapists who, you know, run these very small, like 10, 15 person sessions, and they're sort of like they're like the modern day Freuds and Jung's,
Yeah.
like our time.
I really like the internal family systems concept, I guess, framework for this type of therapy, where it's like inside you have different parts, is what he calls them, but they're basically
Parts
different
work, yeah.
personalities.
Yeah, my therapist focuses on parts work as well.
Yeah.
It's really, really powerful.
Yeah, and so you know you have these conflicting parts, and it is this conversation in your head. You know, parts serve different roles, and in order to kind of get to your higher self, it's about accepting and seeing and validating those parts instead of oftentimes we're trying to suppress them or you know fight against them. You know,
pushing them into our shadow.
Yeah.
And then if it's in the shadow, then you don't see it, and then it comes out like when you're not looking.
Exactly.
Right? When you don't get sleep, when you like didn't get your coffee,
something bad happens.
You know, you're frustrated.
Yeah.
And then it comes out, and then it's like, whoa, where did that come from?
Yeah. That's awesome that you're doing it.
It helps a lot. It's insane.
Cool.
I mean, I'm insane. That's the thing. I'm like very, very far off from like being fully integrated in a way, you know, but you know, basically what I expect is like, I will do the work for the rest of my life. And then when I finally figure it out, I'll die.
That's the human journey.
That's right.
That's the human experience, right? Everybody starts off, you know, you start off in this very pure state, born in the world, and then experience the trauma of growing up. And, you know, no matter what your best circumstance is with the best parents and the, you know, most wealthy, affluent area, you're going to have some trauma, and then spend the rest of your life becoming conscious of it and unpacking it and working on yourself until you achieve some level of wisdom and then die. That's
hopefully pass it on. I mean, I want to piggyback what you were saying earlier around like wanting followers, because what, you know, where my mind goes around that, I know we were talking about it as like a negative thing, but you know, and it can be, I mean, it can be, maybe it's not, where it's like your ego, like you want to project yourself, like this concept of the self.
Yep.
And like, you know, egoic thoughts like are sometimes bad, but not always bad. And I'm like, you know, what if you took wanting followers, but then that's just like a metric for wanting impact?
Yeah. So talk more about that. Like you have, you know, we work together. So I'll just tell you of the TLDR for your background. Sold posters to Twitter for 20 mil, and then worked at Y-Combinator. We worked together at YC, Group 4 for life.
It was the best. Group 4.
Yeah, we had a blast for a couple of years, and then you kind of concurrently had established Initialized and went on, and now you're like running Initialized, which is this huge fund now, and like, you know, this is kind of like everywhere I look, every good deal, there's like Initialized has already been there, which I love.
Those are all the headlines.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't believe what you know, how we had to grind the sausage to get here, but that's for another time.
Yeah. But now you're like going super deep in the last maybe year and a half, something like that, into the creator world and
totally
making YouTubes for your audience, and people love it. You know, the response from Silicon Valley. I read the comments on your YouTubes, and people are just like so thankful. So tell me more about like your passion for that and where that comes from, and why. Like, I think you're right that there is a element of creating that is really good. If, you know, both of us are kind of putting out messages of, I call it like edutainment, right? Like we're both trying to be entertaining, but we're also like trying to teach people something that maybe we wish we knew 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Yeah, if we can skip people ahead.
Yeah.
You know, so much to unpack there.
Yeah.
I guess off the bat, I have to give it up for Paul Graham, because like, think about the impact of his essays on creating Y Combinator and creating our career, like being a really key part of your career and my career. You know, I'd be like stuck at Microsoft or like some other company, just being, you know, designer code monkey someplace. You know, it was his essay that was like, you weren't meant to have a job, that put me on a totally different course. And it was like it's like, I think about these things in terms of church or cult, really, but I realize now it's actually church. Cults are bad for you. cults, church is good for you. Cults are bad for you. You know, cults are like, oh, the leader goes and like does a bunch of heinous shit, like takes advantage of their followers. Churches, like, you know, not all of them, but many of them, like the intention at least is to like leave people better off than they, and give them a community and help make them successful in many different pursuits, right? And so, you know, I got to give it up to PG, and that's, you know, what I want YouTube to be. You know, it is like, let's entertain them, but then let's also give them, you know, a big old piece of vegetables.
You don't even know that
when
they're
you
eating
feed your
it.
kid now,
Yeah.
you got to do that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, here's this, you know, here's like the mashed potatoes, or here's the corn. You love corn, right? But then here's like a big piece of broccoli,
Yeah.
and it's like, if you put it together, you won't notice, and then, you know, you'll be better off. Right?
Yep.
So I think that's like the backdrop. I mean, even taking a step back, it's like, it's really powerful. It's really powerful to have a platform for this, and the people who have these platforms, some of them are super, just the best at it, right? Like Naval is amazing, Paul Graham is amazing, you know, Fred Wilson, amazing blogger, like demystify the whole industry. You know, these people, you can help people so fundamentally through all, you know, Andreessen's old blog, you know, like there's still a PMarca archive. If you haven't seen it yet, like, you know, he took it off like 10 years ago, but, you know, it's still online because it's so valuable. Like people have mirrored it like 1,000 times, because it's basically like, you know, these breadcrumbs into how to build companies, right? So it is sort of you and I sort of becoming more like nerve cells, right? Like, you know, that's what you get to do. It's like, how do we signal boost people who are smart and interesting and who are beneficial? And that's what the world needs, especially right now, especially as the institutions themselves become decrepit and not trustworthy, actually. Like they become just like predatory.
And so tell me, like, I guess we're in the process of creating a new set of institutions, right? You know, people, whether it's people's YouTube channels or, you know, people's blogs or Twitter. One thing that runs through all of your work, in both in YouTube, but then also on just like how you interact. You know, we work together, so like how you've interacted with founders, and I've watched you interact with founders for over a decade. It's like, is really like a kindness and compassion and support, you know, really being there for people. And I think that you have this
but then you gotta tell them the real dirty. You can't, because it's like, yeah, I mean, I think that second part is, well, I want to use the first part to be heard, and then the second part is what they need.
Right. And so tell me more about
hard.
that. Like, where did that come from, and like why is that so important to you?
Well, I think this is the place to talk about this, because there's not really a lot of places where, you know, especially the interviewer is even receptive to this, but I know you get this. It's in a lot of my journey and a lot of like sort of my deeper work, I'm starting to realize I basically, you know, have you heard of the book The Egg by Andy Weir?
Yeah.
He's the guy who did, yeah.
It's an amazing book.
At some point, maybe 10 years ago, I basically decided to live my life as if that were true.
Oh, wow.
And so in the book, well, I fail at it all the time because I forget myself, and but I realized that was at some point, you know, you get to choose whatever cosmology you live in, and I choose that one because that is what I think will get me to our collective goals the fastest and the best, in the best way possible. And that's where the impact matters, you know? It's like, and some of this is rooted in what I read about from like the 60s and 70s, you know? I think people really don't think about enough, like to what degree Timothy Leary and, you know, the LSD movement and, you know, all of those things were part of the counterculture that spawned the personal computer revolution. And then on top of that was the internet. And on top of that was the web browser. On top of that was the mobile revolution, right? And then, you know, here we are, right? So I think that that's where I want to go with it, you know? Like, how do we continue to remake all of society And then the best way to do that is to think about what is beneficial for each other, right? And because we are one, actually. So I apologize for some people who, can't stand the new agey. But it's also what Christ would want. I do consider myself also a Christian. If you really dig deep down, it's like that's how Christ wants people to actually treat each other.
Yeah, for people who haven't read this story in the Egg, it's a beautiful short story by Andy Weir, and in the story it kind of outlines that we're just one soul living all of the different lives of every human being, kind of. And so, when you're kind to someone, you're being kind to yourself. When you're terrible to someone else, you're being terrible to yourself. And I think that's a really beautiful way to live.
Yeah. And I think it's, Andy Weir didn't come up with it. It's rooted in sort of Hinduism and Buddhism and, a lot of the Eastern religions, which, are really in stark contrast to the Western culture we live in. Because if you go to a lot of those communities, if you go on the social networks, like here in America, we use like, here's our face, right? Like it's like Facebook, like it's your face. Like, and then like, if you look at other social networks in other countries, it's often like you as a part of like, a community or a group of people, or like in a big park, or like in a beautiful place in your city. And it's like, it makes sense. Like these things are highly cultural. And I think the more that Eastern philosophy comes into the West, perhaps we will have a better society as well.
I love that. And I see that as a driving force in like pretty much everything you do. So I think you're living it.
Trying. And then, I don't know, it's all for the lulz anyway, right? Like we're all going to die someday. So it's like, if I accept this cosmology and like my individual life, I can have my individual pleasures in my life, but, and then I don't know, to bring it all full circle, it's like we work in tech, and it's like the platforms, the systems, the things that like, we don't really build them anymore. We used to build them, but like now we're trying to empower like that next generation. We literally try to give them money and a community and like the words to go out and like have the impact for like that next thing. That's like super extreme amplification. And then this is, YouTube is just one platform out of many that has a really extreme distribution algo. And all I'm saying right now at some level is like, hey, if you want impact, like you got to go where the algo tells you to. And, I'm basically planning to spend like, if it takes the rest of my life, it's like, that's fine. Like I'm having fun. I like to edit. I like to write stories. I like to think, I open up my DMs because I want to hear what other people, like the other avatars of me, of you, are saying. And then if I can, basically that's like talking to your users, right? If I can take that, there are like common themes that come up every single time. And I want to save people from like, a lifetime, their lives of like knocking their head against the wall over and over again, right? And the hard part is like 99% of startups like really don't make it, right? And now the other thing that I realize now is like our time at Y-Combinator was absurd because PG basically designed a system where, at least 30 or 40% of those people you met every single day were really good, right? It wasn't perfect, right? Like not every YC alum is, gonna make it, but they at least pass like a really, really high bar. Like they are the top 2% of people in the world trying to start a startup at that moment. And so we got to see like the part that actually works. And I realized that, part of the reason why there's so much bad behavior in investor land is that like the great like majority of people who ever have like come up through the business never see the quality of stuff that we saw in that concentration. So they have a different mindset. They have a different worldview. They have a different ideology, right? And it's completely ego driven. Like, sorry, I don't want to like paint all VCs in the same brush, but and there are lots of incredible exceptions. In fact, the ones that are doing well, that are our friends, like they're the ones who don't do it. But like the reason why the asset class is such a failure and, so terrible is actually that. Like they never, you can work your entire career in VC and never see a single good deal. Or when you finally see it, you say no to it because you picked up the wrong patterns from, all the other bad things you saw.
So how does that knowledge and our experience at YC affect like how you run Initialized today?
I think we just try to be way, way longer duration. It still blows me away that very prominent, really good, investors who you and I know refuse to do seed extensions. And it's like, come on, guys, like this is like a 10-year overnight. It's like, at the end, it looks like an overnight success, but like how many extensions did, Justin TV need? Or like how much, or like many of our friends, it's like, as long as the founder wants to do it and like they have the skills to do it and the market is there, it's like, we set aside half our first check just to do extensions, right? And it's like, we try not to give up. And to the extent that we can, help the founder get to that next stage and just do no harm, like that's the most important thing, actually. Like it'll pay back like tenfold in all these other ways.
And it has paid back for you guys. I mean, you're sitting on a slew of amazing companies, whether it's Instacart, but also the Coinbase IPO coming up. I mean, yeah, I'm so excited for you. It like couldn't happen to a better person, Garry.
Oh, I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, it's
I'm grateful. I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, this is my life. Holy crap. It's awesome though. I mean, like I am very grateful. And then now it's like, how do we make it keep going?
Yeah.
Like this is the time. If not us, then who?
So one last question for you, and then I'll open it to our audience question. What's the one piece of advice that you would go back and give, Garry of 15 years ago when you were first starting off?
Oh man, so many things.
Join Facebook.
I think the number one thing easily is like sell your startup to Facebook in 2009. That would have been, and buy Bitcoin. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, what's funny now is I realize like those answers are really around a cosmology or like ideology of like accumulation, of like getting the most amount of money and like being most successful in the eyes of others. And then, I'm trying to figure out a way to have a different set of values that is not like money's still there. Like you have to keep score somehow, but money is not the only thing. And the other thing that I realize is kind of scary, like especially from my 20s, is like if I had become as successful as I am now when I was 22, I wonder if I would have been ruined. Like I never would, basically it would have been short-circuited, and then I never would have learned any of the things I learned along the way. And then I, maybe never would have figured out that like I was put on this earth to have as much impact as possible in this very particular way in tech.
That's a beautiful thought. And I think that that resonates with me because I felt often, I have to go through the journey I've been through is the journey that was supposed to be to make me the person I am today.
Yeah, that's the quest, brother.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. So now we will open it up. Henry, do you want to come on down? He's our question asker of the day.
Awesome. Welcome, Henry.
I'll put it in Discord.
Thanks for having me, dude. This is awesome. I mean, I love that you're making space for this, and it's long form, and we don't have to be in a rush. Like,
yeah,
this is great.
This is amazing. This is such a good one. I think this is one of the best conversations, and it's going to really help a lot of people out there. Just to hear it from someone who's been as successful as an investor as you, like through this process. Like, I think it's going to, like being vulnerable, the pain, like every part of it is like has been huge. All right.
Yeah, you're paving the way. Hey, Henry, how's it going, man?
Hey, Garry. Yeah, thanks for being on. I've been really enjoying this episode, and specifically you kind of sharing your background. I definitely related to it a lot, and I think almost a lot of Chinese people in our generation might feel the same because of their parents, and especially growing up in the West, it's like it feels very isolating. You don't really know a lot of people in person who've gone through the same thing. So being able to kind of hear it on podcasts like this, where you're so open with sharing it, it's really great. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to ask you a question. This one is from Jen. She says a lot of the time, people in startups talk about risking it all. You know, there's the quit your job, drop out of college mentality. Did you ever feel like, because you had to support your parents, did you ever feel like you couldn't take as many risks? And how did that impact your startup journey?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, I wish I was as magnanimous as like wanting to support my parents at that time. You know, the reality is coming out of college, I was like, yeah, Stanford grad. You know, got my $70,000 a year job. I thought I was a hotshot. I ran out and got like the nicest apartment in Seattle, like in Lower Queen Anne, like right next to my favorite martini bar. And I bought like a brand new, you know, jet black Honda Accord V6, and I was like, yeah, I got the V6. I'm made now. I'm like street racing. I'm like 22 years old. It's like, I feel super dumb about that because, you know, I still had credit card debt. I had like $50,000, $60,000 worth of like student loans. I was like deeply in debt. And then I went to a job that you know, I hated, actually. I hated working at Microsoft, honestly. It really fucking sucked. It was not a fun time, and I didn't do well. And then the worse it gets, the more you sort of fall into like the consumerist trap, which I think like capitalism does sort of enforce on people. And I would like to save people from that. You know, the more when you have a high paying job that you hate, you end up taking the money and using it as like a salve. You get like cut on your arm because like you had a bad meeting or you can't get things done, and then you're frustrated, and then, you know, you go home and you spend like $20 on drinks at the bar, and then you go online, or you like go to, you know, for me it was like going to Banana Republic and like buying Banana Republic clothes at 22 was like the thing. You know, I could never afford this stuff before, you know. And so I'm like, oh my God, there are like so many things about like how I treated money and status and like, you know, my face, my mask, like all of these things seemed very important to me. And then it's like, none of that shit was important. It's like all that was important at that moment was like being a good engineer, being a good product person, being a good designer, and making things for people. And that was the thing that like that I could have done right away. But instead I was like running a hamster wheel race, trying to like impress people who I didn't give a shit about. And then like trying to, you know, cover up all these like mini cuts all over like the inside of my soul with like material possessions, you know, while I was like massively in debt. And it's like, that was me in a nutshell at 22. And so, you know, I did it to myself. Right. And so, and then it wasn't until later when I saw like the magic of how powerful it is to get product market fit and to create something for people and enter a state of flow, like by doing that I was like, oh, there's like a whole other game here. And like, I need, you know, so I don't know if it's clear from like some of my YouTube videos. It's like every single time I'm like, you need to see this, like, check out this crazy shit. That's what I'm trying to do is like, this is for you, right? Like if you can build, this is for you, like do it now, like stop everything, like stop all the bullshit, you know, it's time.
Awesome. Garry, thanks so much for joining. This is such an amazing conversation. This is one of my favorites.
Oh, man. Thank you, Justin. Thanks for doing this. Keep fighting the good fight. It's always great to spend time with you.
Same, brother.